Bear leads veteran to a remote forest cabin. What he finds inside brings him to tears. The wind scraped across the Wyoming plains like a whispered memory, brittle and sharp, carrying the scent of pine and the ghost of a coming winter. Logan Hale stood on the warped porch of the Hale family ranch, shoulders hunched beneath his worn canvas jacket, steam curling from the mug in his calloused hand. The coffee was bitter, burnt, really, but it was hot, and that was enough. He hadn't set foot on this land in years. It was strange how little it had changed. The roof still sagged under the weight of age. The corral gate hung crooked on rusted hinges, and the porch boards creaked with every shift of weight. Samuel Hale, his grandfather, had kept this place together with stubborn hands and quiet grit until the day his heart finally gave out. Logan hadn't made it back in time. The call had come in the middle of a recon assignment halfway across the world. By the time he arrived, the house was empty, except for dust, the faint smell of saddle leather, and silence. He had buried his grandfather beneath the old oak tree on the North Ridge, where the wind never stopped talking. The funeral had been small, a few neighbors, the sheriff, and a preacher who spoke in generalities, as if Samuel were just another name in a book of the dead. Logan had stayed behind afterward alone, listening to the wind as it whipped through the brittle grass. He didn't cry. Couldn't. The army had taught him how to bury emotion alongside the bodies of his friends. He'd grown used to numbness, wore it like armor. This trip was supposed to be brief. Tie up loose ends, sell the ranch, leave again. But something in the land seemed to resist that plan. Every morning he found himself lingering longer on the porch, listening to the rustle of the trees, the calls of hawks overhead. Something old and heavy in his bones told him this place wasn't done with him yet. It was on the fifth morning that he saw the bear. The frost had glazed the grass silver, and the sun was just beginning to break over the tree line when he spotted the movement at the eastern edge of the pasture. At first he thought it was a shadow. Then it stepped forward, slow and steady, as if it had all the time in the world. A bear, massive, cinnamon brown with a thick, dark stripe running down the length of its back like spilled ink. It didn't lumber or snort or shy away as most bears would. Instead, it stood still, its eyes fixed on Logan with unnerving clarity. Logan's breath caught. The animal was too far to be dangerous, but he felt his pulse quicken nonetheless. The bear didn't move for several moments, just watched. Its gaze wasn't wild, not empty or fearful like most wildlife, but patient, aware. Then it turned. Not in fear, not hurried, but deliberate. It stepped into the trees, paused, and looked back over its shoulder. Logan found himself stepping off the porch. He didn't think. He didn't plan. He just moved, drawn by something that tugged deep beneath the layers of grief and fatigue. His boots crunched through the frost as he crossed the broken fence line and entered the woods. The trail the bear followed wasn't a trail at all, just an old, half-forgotten game path woven through the underbrush. The bear remained ahead, always just in sight, never fleeing, never stopping. Occasionally it would turn to glance back, as if making sure Logan followed. He did. For miles, it seemed. The forest thickened, the air growing colder, denser. Sunlight dappled the mossy floor. Pine needles whispered underfoot. Somewhere in the distance, a creek murmured beneath a sheet of early ice. After nearly an hour of weaving through the forest, the bear led him into a narrow valley, choked with trees and fog. There, nestled beneath a jagged outcrop of stone, was a small, crumbling cabin, nearly lost to time. Its roof was sagging, one shutter dangling loose on a single hinge, and smoke long absent from its crooked chimney. The bear stopped at the clearing's edge, turned once more, and met Logan's gaze. For a long heartbeat, man and beast stared at one another. Then the bear stepped into the mist and disappeared without a sound. Logan stood frozen. The silence after the bear's departure was thick, pressing. The cabin stood like a secret long buried. Something inside stirred. A sound, a groan, a cough. Logan's instincts, sharpened by years of war, surged to the surface. He moved forward, cautiously, hand brushing the grip of his pocket knife, just in case. The door creaked open with a reluctant moan. Inside, the air was rank with mildew and something sour, illness, maybe. The dim light filtered through the broken window, revealing a figure curled on a cot in the corner, half covered in blankets that were more whole than cloth. The man was pale, gaunt, shaking from cold. His lips cracked, his skin flushed with fever. When Logan knelt beside him, the man's eyes fluttered open. "Samuel?" the voice rasped. It was a whisper, scraped raw. Logan's gut tightened. "You know Samuel Hale?" The man blinked slowly, pain written deep in the furrows of his face. "Henry," he murmured. "Henry Whitaker." Then his eyes rolled back, and he collapsed into unconsciousness. Logan reacted fast. He pulled his phone from his jacket and dialed the sheriff. Coordinates, emergency medical response, hypothermia, possible infection. While waiting, he built a fire in the cracked old stove using kindling scavenged from a broken chair. He wrapped the man in his own coat, dribbled sips of water into his mouth, and watched the frail chest rise and fall. When the medics arrived 40 minutes later, they took over swiftly, their movements practiced and efficient. One of them looked up at Logan with a mix of confusion and gratitude. "He wouldn't have made it another day," the medic said. "You saved him." Logan didn't respond. His gaze drifted back to the tree line, where the mist had swallowed everything. The bear was gone. But it had led him here. That much was undeniable. In the days that followed, as Henry lay in a hospital bed fighting for his life, Logan found himself drawn deeper into the mystery. Who was this man? How did he know Samuel? Why was he out there dying alone in the forest? Sheriff Morales said Henry had been off the grid for years, a hermit mostly. Few knew he was still alive, but he hadn't always been that way. Back in the day, Henry Whitaker had been a medic in Vietnam, same unit as Samuel Hale. The past, it seemed, had come crawling out of the woods, not to haunt, but to ask something of him. That night, Logan stood on the porch again, staring toward the dark trees. The wind carried the scent of pine and something older, something wilder. He could still feel the bear's gaze on him, steady, patient, aware. Something inside him shifted. He didn't know it yet, but that morning had changed everything. He had come back to Whispering Pines to say goodbye. But the land, the legacy, and the ghost of his grandfather had other plans. The days that followed blurred into a quiet, determined rhythm. Logan found himself rising before dawn, drawn from sleep not by obligation, but by something else, something like purpose. The morning air bit at his skin, sharp and bracing, as he moved across the frost-hardened ground toward the barn Samuel had once used for horses. It was half collapsed now, the doors sagging and hinges rusted, but Logan saw potential. With each board he hammered back into place, each nail driven deep into splintering wood, he felt pieces of himself settling, grounding. He had not expected to stay past the funeral, but something had taken root inside him when he followed that bear into the woods. It wasn't just the rescue, but it was Henry's eyes, half blind with fever, whispering Samuel's name with the reverence of brotherhood. It was the way the trees had closed behind them, as if sealing the trail, as if ensuring he couldn't go back the way he came. Henry's condition improved slowly. The hospital kept him warm and medicated, his frail body cocooned in sterile white. Logan visited every afternoon, sitting beside the bed as the older man drifted in and out of sleep. They spoke in fragments, memories, names, a few war stories filtered through the fog of pain and medication. Henry's hands trembled when he held a plastic cup of water, but his voice, though weak, held conviction when he spoke of Vietnam. He talked of three others: Daniel Peterson, Lewis Carter, and of course, Samuel. "Your grandfather kept us all tethered," Henry had said one evening, his voice thin as smoke. "When things got bad, he wrote letters, sent money when we didn't ask, showed up when we didn't know we needed him. You're more like him than you think." Logan didn't respond to that. He wasn't ready to believe it. But that night, back at the ranch, he unlocked the old chest Samuel had kept hidden beneath his bed and found dozens of yellowed letters, all addressed to names he recognized from Henry's stories. Letters full of quiet support, deep affection, and an unwavering bond that stretched across decades and miles. Among the papers was a sealed envelope with his name written in Samuel's careful script. Logan stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a single page. The handwriting was steady but weathered, as if written in the final days when Samuel's hands had already begun to betray him. "Logan, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I won't pretend to have always known the right way to love you, but I hope you know I was proud. I've carried my past like a pack I couldn't put down, but I've never regretted my brothers. Henry, Daniel, and Lewis, they were the best of us. If they're still alive, bring them back to Whispering Pines. This land isn't just soil and fence posts, it's a promise. I built this place so we'd have somewhere to return to. A place for peace, a place for the broken to rest. I think you understand that now. Stay, if you can, build something here. Not for me, for yourself. Logan folded the letter with shaking hands. His chest felt tight, not with sorrow, but with the strange, unfamiliar ache of hope. The next day, he called Daniel Peterson. The voice that answered was gruff but steady, tinged with suspicion until Logan explained who he was. There was a long pause, followed by a sigh that felt weighted with years. He never stopped writing, Daniel said. Your granddad, even when I didn't answer. Logan told him about Henry, about the bear, about the letter. Daniel didn't laugh. He simply said, give me a few days, I'll come. Lewis Carter was harder to reach, living off-grid in the southern hills of Montana, but Daniel promised he'd make contact. Lewis listens to me, he said. He'll come too. Logan hung up and stared out at the pasture, where the early morning mist hung low and slow like breath on glass. For the first time in months, he felt something close to anticipation. As days turned into weeks, Logan worked the land. He rebuilt the fencing, repaired the porch, cleared out the barn loft. It was slow, deliberate work, but it filled his hours with purpose and motion. One morning, while replacing a window pane in the main house, he heard the soft crunch of footsteps on gravel. He turned and saw a woman standing at the gate, mid-30s, tall, wrapped in a green flannel jacket with a canvas satchel slung over one shoulder. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a loose braid, and her eyes, sharp and curious, settled on him like a question waiting to be answered. You must be Logan Hale, she said, offering a small, cautious smile. I'm Ellie Collins. My uncle's Daniel Peterson. Logan blinked. Didn't expect you so soon. Ellie shrugged. Uncle Dan can't drive anymore. I'm his ride. Thought I'd come ahead and see what kind of place we're walking into. Her voice held the cadence of someone who'd grown up around these parts, firm, unafraid, practical. Logan gestured toward the porch. You're welcome to stay. There's a lot to see. They talked. At first, it was about the basics, weather, renovations, Daniel's stubbornness. But soon the conversation drifted deeper. Ellie was a veterinarian working with a local conservation group that tracked wildlife in the surrounding forests. We've been hearing stories, she said one evening, sitting across from Logan on the porch steps as the sky burned orange, about a bear that doesn't act like a bear. Locals think it's some kind of guardian spirit. They've started calling it Whisper. Logan's heart skipped. He didn't say anything, but she noticed the flicker in his eyes. You've seen it, she said, not a question. The day I found Henry, he replied, it led me to him. Ellie didn't laugh. She just nodded. Animals know more than we give them credit for. Days passed, then Daniel arrived, cane in hand, grumbling about the cold but clearly moved by the sight of the ranch. He embraced Logan stiffly, the way men of his generation often did, with one arm and a back slap, hiding emotion behind weathered smiles. A week later, Lewis came too, tall and wiry, his voice slow and soft like wind through grass. When Henry was finally released from the hospital, Logan brought him home to Whispering Pines. A hospital bed was set up in the front room, windows open to the pasture, fire crackling nearby. And for the first time in nearly half a century, the four men were together again. They didn't speak of war right away. Instead, they told stories about Samuel, about the times he patched fences in the rain, or fell asleep on the tractor with a bottle of bourbon. Laughter came easily, followed by long silences filled with memory. One night, as the men sat under the stars, Ellie brought out a bottle of whiskey Samuel had hidden in the cellar. Logan watched as the old soldiers passed it around like a ritual, eyes glinting with something ancient and unspoken. And then, at the edge of the clearing, the bear returned. It didn't approach. It never did. It simply stood among the trees, watching, a silhouette framed by moonlight and stillness. Lewis saw it first. He's back, he murmured. Henry's eyes followed, his breath catching. Whisper. No one spoke after that. They just sat in reverent silence, the crackle of the fire and the bear's calm presence weaving something sacred into the night air. In that moment, Logan understood what his grandfather had meant. This place wasn't just land, it was sanctuary, it was promise, it was beginning again. Autumn deepened its hold on the land as Logan rose each morning before the sun, the sky still a canvas of indigo and fading stars. The ranch breathed beneath a thin veil of frost, quiet yet alive in a way he hadn't noticed when he first returned. He moved with purpose now, each chore part of a greater whole. Repairs, organization, vision. Whispering Pines wasn't just a place anymore. It was becoming something Samuel had once dreamed about, and Logan now carried that dream like a compass in his chest. Inside the house, the rooms had begun to fill again, not just with furniture, but with voices, memories, and laughter that echoed down the hallways like wind through tall grass. Henry's hospital bed had been positioned near the fireplace in the front room. Logan made sure it was always stocked with extra blankets, the hearth kept warm, and a rotation of visitors that included Daniel, Lewis, and Ellie. Each day, Henry seemed to gain a little more color, though his voice remained thin and gravel-edged. Yet when he smiled, rare but honest, it had the weight of someone who had seen darkness and survived it. Daniel took to the porch like it was sacred ground, a cigarette always between two fingers, though he rarely lit it. Lewis wandered the fields at dawn, his boots silent on the frostbitten earth, eyes scanning the horizon like he was still on patrol. Logan often watched them from the barn as he worked, and despite the ghosts they all carried, he saw something mending in their quiet routines, something healing in their shared presence. Ellie became part of that rhythm without effort. She showed up in the mornings with a thermos of black coffee and a new list of questions about the bear. Logan had tried early on to keep his feelings in check, to chalk up their connection to circumstance and proximity, but there was something about her, steadiness mixed with curiosity, resilience underlined with warmth, that made her hard to keep at a distance. She never pushed, never pried, but her presence settled into the ranch like she'd belonged there all along. Together they began walking the property, logging old trails, noting signs of wildlife. Ellie was fascinated by Whisper, though she rarely called him that aloud. "There's something different about this bear," she'd say as they walked beneath the dense canopy of pines, sunlight dripping through in pale ribbons. "I've tracked wildlife for over a decade. No bear acts like this. Territorial, yes, curious sometimes, but not purposeful." Logan didn't disagree. The bear's appearances were infrequent, but always meaningful. Once, when Daniel suffered a dizzy spell near the north field, Whisper had emerged from the tree line just as Logan reached him, standing motionless until Daniel was safely inside. Another evening, during a thunderstorm that knocked out power, Logan glimpsed the silhouette of the bear at the edge of the barn, its dark stripe illuminated by lightning. There, then gone. Ellie had begun documenting its visits, sketching in a notebook, cross-referencing sightings with local rumors. "The townspeople are talking," she told Logan one night as they sat near the fire. "They say the bear's a guardian, that it watches over the ranch like it used to belong here." Logan nodded slowly. "Maybe it does." Her eyes flicked to his, and in the soft glow of the firelight, the space between them thinned. As the days shortened, the work intensified. Logan and Lewis rebuilt the bunkhouse on the western edge of the property, converting it into a guest house with 4 small rooms and a communal space. Daniel and Henry helped where they could, directing from the porch or sorting old tools and lumber. Ellie brought veterinary equipment and supplies, turning a small shed into a field clinic. It all came together slowly, piece by piece, but it was becoming real. A place not just for the 4 of them, but for others who needed what Samuel had envisioned: a sanctuary, a home. One crisp afternoon, a pickup truck pulled into the gravel driveway, its tires crunching like dry leaves. Logan stepped off the ladder he'd been using to hang solar lights along the porch. The driver emerged, tall, broad-shouldered, military cut, late 30s. He looked around with the posture of someone not quite sure if they were welcome. "Logan Haleway?" the man asked. "That's me. Name's Carter Wilson. I served with your unit's 3rd Battalion in Kandahar. Heard what you're building out here. Figured I'd see it for myself." Logan extended a hand. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need." Carter hesitated, then shook it. That evening, as the fire crackled and the air cooled, Carter shared pieces of his story. Discharged with a knee injury, divorced. Alienated from family, he'd been living out of his truck for months. Didn't think I'd ever sleep indoors again, he muttered. This place feels different. Logan glanced toward the tree line. It is. Word began to spread, slowly at first, a veterans forum, a whisper from one friend to another. Within weeks, more arrived, some just passing through, some needing time, some needing silence. Logan made room for them all. The bunkhouse filled. The barn became a workshop and a gathering place. Ellie added a small greenhouse behind the clinic. The ranch, once hollow and still, was now alive with the sound of boots on wood, laughter by the fire pit, the low hum of purpose shared, and always, always the silent presence of Whisper. The bear returned one fog-heavy morning, standing just past the tree line as Logan and Ellie loaded feed into the barn. It didn't move, didn't blink. Ellie froze, her breath visible in the cold air. "It's him," she whispered. Logan stepping forward slowly, no fear in his chest, only awe. The bear watched them for a long moment before turning and disappearing into the trees. Logan placed a hand over his chest, feeling the steady beat of something deeper than gratitude, something like belonging. That night, Henry asked to be wheeled outside. The stars were sharp and clear above, the kind of night sky only a place like this could offer. Logan wrapped a blanket around Henry's shoulders and sat beside him. "You did good, kid," Henry said after a while. "Your grandfather would be proud." Logan stared up at the constellations. "It wasn't just me." Henry's eyes gleamed with emotion. "No, it was all of us. And that bear, whatever it is, it's part of it too." Logan didn't argue. He'd stopped needing explanations. Some things he'd learned were better left sacred. In the days that followed, more stories came. Veterans from every branch, every war. Some arrived in silence, others with tears in their eyes. They found a place to rest, to heal, to work the land and rebuild pieces of themselves. The walls of the main house filled with photos, letters, mementos. Whispering Pines had become more than a ranch. It was a living legacy. One evening, Logan stood by the north fence, watching the sun sink low, painting the sky in amber and rose. Ellie stood beside him, her hand slipping into his without words. Together they watched as a second bear appeared beside Whisper, smaller, lighter in color, moving with the same calm presence. Ellie's breath caught. "Another one," Logan nodded. "Maybe peace draws them in." She looked up at him. "Maybe peace draws us all." Behind them, laughter rang from the porch. Henry was telling a story. Daniel was arguing over card rules. Lewis was nodding off in his chair. And somewhere in the fields beyond, the earth held the weight of old pain now turning slowly to something softer, something like hope. Snow arrived early that year, blanketing the valley in a quiet hush that softened everything it touched. The days grew shorter, the nights longer, and Whispering Pines settled into a deep, reflective stillness. Logan stood by the frost-covered window of the main house, coffee cooling in his hands, eyes drawn to the edge of the woods where the trees stood like silent sentinels. The land had changed, grown fuller, warmer, more alive, and so had he. What had started as a reluctant homecoming had become a rebirth, a purpose he hadn't known he was searching for. Veterans came and went, each bringing their own weight, their own wounds. Some stayed for days, others for months. The land welcomed them all. Logan didn't need to ask what they carried. It was written in their gait, in the way they stared too long at empty fields or flinched at sudden sounds. But in time, the air worked its quiet magic. Chores gave them something to hold. The fire gave them warmth. And Whisper, the ever-present shadow at the edge of the trees, gave them something else entirely. Something they couldn't name but felt all the same. Henry had grown weaker as the snow deepened, his body thinning like the light of late autumn. Logan moved his bed closer to the fire, kept the kettle hot, and sat with him through the quiet hours of dawn when the world felt thin and holy. Daniel and Lewis stayed close, reluctant to leave his side. Their banter softer now, tinged with memory and the unspoken knowledge that their circle was drawing tight once more. One morning, Henry took Logan's hand in his and pressed something into it. It was a rusted dog tag, the letters nearly worn away. "From the jungle," he whispered. "I thought I'd leave it with Sam, but now, I think you're the one who needs it." Logan clutched the tag without words, something fierce pressing behind his ribs. Henry's breath was shallow, eyes distant, yet there was peace there too, a surrender not to death, but to the idea that what he had come back for had been fulfilled. He always knew, Henry murmured, voice barely audible. This place, it was never about endings. It was always meant to be a beginning. That afternoon, as flurries began to fall, Ellie returned from the northern trail with news that made Logan's blood run cold. Henry hadn't been seen in the house, not in his bed, not on the porch. His boots were gone, his coat missing. Panic surged through the ranch like wildfire. Daniel and Lewis shouted his name through the trees. Ellie saddled the horses. Logan grabbed the rifle and flashlight and disappeared into the forest. The sky darkened too quickly, snow swallowing sound and trail alike. Logan's boots sank into drifts as he followed the faint prints leading away from the ranch. They were Henry's, uneven, dragging. The old man had gone into the woods alone. The weight of it struck Logan like a punch. Henry had known he was slipping, had felt the closeness of the end. Maybe he hadn't wanted anyone to see. Or maybe he had wanted to be near Samuel one last time, out in the wild where they had once felt alive. Hours passed, the cold bit deep. Logan pushed forward, lungs burning, fingers stiff. The trees closed around him, heavy with snow and silence. Then, just when despair threatened to take root, he saw it. Not Henry, but the bear. Whisper, standing as still as the frozen trees, eyes gleaming in the falling snow. Logan froze. The bear turned its head and looked to the left, into a ravine choked with fallen branches and ice. Then it moved, slow and certain. Logan followed, down the embankment through thorns that tore at his coat, into the hollow where a figure lay slumped beneath a pine. Henry, pale, still. Logan dropped to his knees, pressing his fingers to the man's neck. Faint, so faint, but still there. He shouted for Ellie, for Daniel, for anyone. The bear stood at the ridge above, watching. Then, as if satisfied, it turned and disappeared again into the white. Back at the house, Ellie and Lewis helped Logan carry Henry inside. The fire blazed. Hot towels, warm broth, blankets layered like armor. Slowly, color returned to Henry's cheeks. His eyelids fluttered. "Found him," he whispered hoarsely. "Found me again." Logan smiled through the tightness in his throat. "Yeah, old man, we found each other." Henry didn't wake again that night, but his breathing grew steady. Logan sat beside him, hand resting on the dog tag in his pocket, heart pounding with something like awe. Whisper had saved them again. Twice now death had been postponed by a force no one could explain. By spring, the land began to thaw. Buds swelled on branches. Birds returned in song. The bunkhouse had been expanded. The greenhouse bloomed, and the ranch was no longer just a refuge for those who came broken. It was a place of living, of growing. Carter had started leading trail rides for the newer arrivals. Ellie hosted wildlife workshops. Veterans tilled soil, repaired fences, built new shelters. There was laughter in the air again, low music drifting from open windows, the soft sounds of community being reborn. Whisper appeared less frequently now, though always at the right moments. A storm approaching, a panic attack in the barn, a funeral. Henry passed in his sleep just after sunrise on a warm April morning. Logan had been with him, sitting silently as the sun broke over the hills. There was no fear in Henry's eyes, only calm, as if he'd seen enough, given enough, and was finally ready to rest. They buried him next to Samuel under the old oak, the ground rich with spring promise. The entire ranch came to a stillness that day, and at the edge of the woods, as the ceremony ended, Whisper stood watching, just for a moment, then vanished. Logan knelt beside the fresh earth and whispered a promise. "I'll keep it going, all of it." And he meant it. Every broken fence mended, every hand that reached out, every soul that arrived lost and left whole. He would carry Samuel's dream forward. By summer, a new trail was carved through the woods, one that led to a quiet meadow where benches had been built, where names were carved into smooth stones and arranged in a circle. A place of reflection, of peace. They called it the Guardian's Rest. And on some mornings, if the light was just right and the air very still, you could see a figure at the far edge of the clearing, huge, silent, watching. Logan no longer questioned its presence. Whisper was part of the land now, a spirit, a symbol, a guide. So was Samuel, so was Henry. And Logan, once a man adrift in the wake of war, was now something else entirely. A steward of something sacred, a brother, a son, a leader. Not because he sought it, but because the land had asked it of him, and he had said yes. One evening as the stars began to bloom across the sky, Ellie slipped her hand into his, and together they walked the fence line in silence. No need for words. The wind rustled through the pines. A distant owl called. The ranch breathed beneath their feet, alive and waiting. Somewhere in the trees, something large moved, slow and watchful. Logan smiled, closed his eyes, and let the peace wash over him. He had come home to bury the past. Instead, he had unearthed something far greater, a future. Summer deepened over whispering pines, casting long golden evenings across the hills and painting the fields in hues of green and gold. The ranch had become a living, breathing rhythm. Sunrises laced with bird song, sweat-slicked days of labor beneath a blazing sun, evenings of shared meals and firelight, stories spoken into the hush of twilight. Logan stood beneath the windmill near the southern pasture, his hand on the warm metal, eyes scanning the horizon as a breeze teased the edges of his shirt. Everything stretched wide and still, peaceful, but never silent. Life pulsed here now, strong and rooted. It was in the boot prints worn into the dirt paths, in the laughter that rolled from the bunkhouse porch, in the scent of wood smoke and tilled earth. More veterans had come. Word had spread far beyond Wyoming's borders. Logan didn't post flyers. There was no website, just quiet testimony from those who had come and found something worth holding on to. They brought their scars, some visible, some buried deep, but they also brought pieces of their old selves. Carpenters, mechanics, cooks, poets, caretakers. The ranch grew not just in number, but in spirit. Gardens expanded, a second barn was raised, and a small library filled with donated books took shape in the old tack room. Ellie had been instrumental in its evolution, her energy steady and boundless. Her connection with the land, with the people, deepened with every week. She split her time between tending to wildlife and working with Logan to coordinate the retreat's growth. Together, they balanced each other like the sun and the moon, opposites in pace, yet aligned in purpose. Logan had begun to let himself think beyond the day-to-day. He dreamed now, not of battlefields or escape, but of longevity, of families visiting, of children running through these fields. He imagined weddings beneath the oak tree, new cabins tucked into the woods, seasons that brought people back again and again. But above all, he imagined Samuel's face, his weathered smile, his quiet nod of approval, and it anchored him in ways the military never could. One warm July morning, Logan rose before dawn and found Whisper waiting by the fence. The bear had returned again, its massive frame unmoving in the blue-gray light. Logan approached slowly, heart steady, gaze soft. Whisper did not retreat. Instead, it sat, massive and quiet, as Logan lowered himself onto the earth. For a long time, they simply existed together. Man and beast, soldier and sentinel. Logan spoke then, voice low and full of reverence. "You've carried something for us, haven't you? For him, for me." The bear didn't move. Logan swallowed the knot in his throat. "Thank you." Then, without drama or spectacle, Whisper stood and walked into the trees, leaving behind the silence of an answered prayer. Logan remained there long after, the morning sun rising warm against his back. That afternoon, Ellie brought news from the local shelter. A young veteran had arrived in town, restless, agitated, unsure of where to go. Logan drove in himself, found the man sitting on the curb outside the bus station, a duffel bag at his feet, a haunted look in his eyes. His name was Mateo, 26, discharged after an IED shattered both his hearing and the stability of his world. He didn't speak much, mostly nodded or wrote things down. But when Logan reached out a hand and said, "You're safe here," Mateo's eyes filled, and he followed. Back at the ranch, Mateo didn't talk for days, but he watched everything. He helped fix fences, shoveled feed, took long walks with the dog that had adopted him, Scout, a mutt with a crooked tail and endless patience. One morning, Ellie found Mateo standing in the greenhouse, palms pressed to the glass, smiling at the sight of sunflowers swaying in the wind. He started signing simple words after that. Not much, just enough. His first full sentence was to Logan, "Feels like a place that forgives." In August, they held a celebration, a quiet, heartfelt gathering to mark the one-year anniversary of Whispering Pine's rebirth. Long tables stretched across the yard, covered in potluck dishes and handmade centerpieces. Old radios played bluesy guitar riffs, and candles flickered in mason jars as the stars blinked awake overhead. Daniel stood and offered a toast, his voice thick with age and memory. To Samuel Hale, who saw what we couldn't, to the land that waited patiently, and to the bear, wherever it is, for leading us home. There were murmurs of agreement, glasses lifted, tears discreetly wiped. Lewis followed, sharing a story of their first patrol in Vietnam, how Samuel had dragged him out of a foxhole when mortar fire pinned them down. "He said something to me that day," Lewis said. "Don't let this be all we are." Took me 50 years to understand he didn't mean war. He meant after. He meant this. They laughed and cried and held each other up that night, not as soldiers, but as men reclaimed by grace. Logan and Ellie stood beneath the stars as the evening wound down. Fireflies danced between them, and the gentle hum of life filled the space where silence had once lived. Logan turned to her, fingers brushing against hers. "I never thought I'd stay," he said quietly. Ellie smiled. "I never thought you'd leave." He chuckled, but it was soft, almost disbelieving. "Do you think it'll last, this place?" Her eyes met his, fierce and full of faith. "It already has." A few weeks later, a woman arrived at the gate, older, with hair like silver smoke and a letter in her hand. She introduced herself as Claire Whitaker, Henry's daughter. "He talked about this place before he passed," she said, voice catching. "Said it was where he found peace. I needed to see it." Logan welcomed her with open arms. He showed her Henry's favorite chair, the bench under the birch tree where he used to nap, the letter he'd written before he slipped away. Claire stayed for 3 days, and when she left, she said, "You gave him something I never could. You gave him home." Logan stood long after she'd gone, fingers resting on the railing of the porch. He thought about how far they'd come, how a broken soldier had followed a bear into the woods and emerged with a mission. Autumn came again, crisp and golden. Leaves fell in swirls, deer moved silently along the ridgelines, and the first frost kissed the tips of the grass. The ranch didn't slow, it deepened, became richer, stronger. The veterans planted trees now, one for each man or woman who found peace here. They named the grove the Circle of Return. Mateo carved names into cedar posts. Carter oversaw construction of a new wing on the guest house. Ellie planned a wildlife corridor that would preserve the land even as it grew. And Logan walked the trails at dawn, spoke softly to the trees, to the land, to whatever spirit guided them still. Sometimes in the hush of morning fog, he thought he saw a figure at the edge of the woods, whisper, ever watching. Sometimes he saw only mist. Either way, he felt the same thing in his chest, gratitude. Years would pass, the ranch would change, evolve, expand. New faces, new laughter, old grief softened by time and belonging. But some things would remain unshaken. The soil, the oak tree, the photo of Samuel and Henry on the mantle, and the feeling that here on this stretch of land, in the arms of the Wyoming wild, the lost could be found again. That redemption wasn't a thing of fire and thunder, but of dirt under fingernails, calloused hands, and silent understanding. And on certain nights, when the moon rose full and pale above the pines, and the wind moved just right, those who listened closely swore they could hear something breathing in the woods, something vast, something kind, something that had always been there, waiting. Bear protects lost woman in snowstorm. When rangers find them both, it's unbelievable. The wind screamed across the Snowvale Mountains with a voice like splitting timber, tearing through the pines in violent gusts that whipped snow into ghostly spirals. Emily Parker stumbled against the white fury, her breath coming in ragged gasps that crystallized in the air and vanished. The cold was not merely cold, it was punishment. It scoured her skin, bit through her gloves, and gnawed at her resolve with teeth made of ice. Her phone was dead, her limbs felt carved from stone, and she had no idea which direction would lead her home. Just an hour ago, she'd been warm and safe inside her grandfather's cabin. She had stepped out to find a cell signal, promising she wouldn't go far. A quick walk up the slope behind the barn, a few steps into the edge of the woods, just enough to send a message to her mother back in Bozeman. She hadn't even taken her proper coat. Now nothing around her looked familiar. The landscape had vanished beneath an avalanche of snow and white haze. The sky had turned to steel. The trees loomed like monuments to silence. The path she'd followed had long since disappeared, and every direction looked the same. Endless, white. She tried calling out, her voice muffled by the wind, the sound devoured by distance. Her throat felt torn, dry. Panic surged in her chest, sharp and hot. She forced it down. She had to keep moving. She thought she saw something between the trees, a flash of wood, maybe the roof of the shed. But when she pushed forward, all she found was more snow. Her legs sank up to the knees. Her boots were soaked, and her socks squelched with every step. Her fingers had gone numb. Her lips cracked, and the taste of blood mixed with the frozen air. She checked her phone one last time. The screen was black. Dead. She was alone, lost, and the blizzard was only getting worse. Hours seemed to pass, but time had lost its meaning. The gray sky never changed, the wind never ceased, and the snow fell as if it had no end. Emily's strength began to fade. She no longer walked with purpose, only with the mechanical shuffle of someone refusing to fall. Her limbs dragged behind her thoughts. Her thoughts became fog. The cold had crept into her bones, into the hollow spaces behind her ribs, and whispered to her that it would be easier to stop. Just lie down, just sleep. It wouldn't hurt. The snow was soft. It would hold her. She fell. The moment her knees gave out, it was like her body had decided for her. She crumpled into the drift, face pressing into the frozen powder. Her eyelashes crusted with frost, her fingers curled weakly toward her chest. It was quiet here. So quiet. Maybe this was okay. Maybe she could just rest. But then, movement. At first she thought it was a hallucination. A shape moved through the blizzard, silent and massive. A dream. A shadow. But it came closer. Emily lifted her head weakly, her breath shallow, and blinked through the snow. A bear. Her breath caught. The creature emerged from the trees, fur dark as burnt ash, huge and slow and deliberate. It didn't roar. It didn't charge. It simply stood there, a mountain wrapped in fur, eyes like fire behind smoke. Her heart pounded once, twice, and then steadied. The bear was watching her, breathing, and not attacking. She couldn't have run if she tried. She was too far gone. So she watched back. The bear took a step forward, snow crunched beneath its paws. Then it turned slowly and walked away. It paused, looked over its shoulder, waited. Emily didn't understand. She blinked again, sure she was imagining it. But the bear was still there. Not leaving, not threatening, just watching, waiting. Gathering what little strength remained, she pushed herself up, her legs trembled. She stumbled, stood, and took one step, then another. The bear moved ahead, and she followed. Through the storm, across frozen terrain, through bramble and down slopes slick with ice. She fell once, gasping. The bear stopped, waited. She stood again, moved. Time unraveled. All she knew was the shape ahead, the rhythm of her breath, the crunch of snow beneath her boots. Finally, the trees parted and a dark hollow opened ahead. A cave, shallow but dry, tucked between outcroppings of stone and wind-carved rock. The bear stepped inside and turned to her once more before laying down against the stone floor. Emily crawled in after, collapsing into the darkness. The wind roared past the entrance like a wild thing denied. Inside, it was quiet. Emily lay on her side, shaking uncontrollably, her mind flickering like the last embers of a dying fire. The bear shifted beside her, close enough to touch now, and lowered its body beside hers. Emily tensed, unsure. Then a wave of warmth touched her back. Not human warmth, but real. Heavy. Alive. The bear had curled its massive form around her. Its body was a wall of heat. Its breath stirred the air beside her face. Her fingers found coarse fur. She didn't question. She simply closed her eyes. That night she dreamed of fire and breath and stories older than memory. Wolves howled in the distance. their cries piercing the wind. She stirred awake, heart hammering. The bear stood, ears twitching, head raised. A growl rumbled from the deep within her chest. Emily watched as the bear moved to the entrance of the cave and stood there, massive and unmoving, a sentinel between her and the forest. The howls grew closer, then stopped. Minutes passed. The bear returned, laid down beside her again, and all was still. When dawn came, it did not come with light, but with a thinning of the storm and a silence so pure it hummed in her ears. Emily stirred, barely believing she was alive. Her body ached. Her lips were cracked, her fingers were numb, but her heart still beat. She turned her head and saw the bear resting beside her, eyes open, watching the mouth of the cave. She whispered, voice hoarse, "Why did you help me?" The bear blinked. She would never have an answer, but deep inside, where words could not reach, something in her already knew. This was not chance, this was something older, a moment shaped by instinct, by trust, by mercy not learned but remembered. Ember, they would later call her, when the news broke, when the rescuers found the cave and the tracks and the fire pit and the prints of wolves in the snow. But for now, Emily knew no names, only that she was alive, that she had been held through the night not by blankets or human arms, but by a creature of the wild, one who had every reason to walk away, but hadn't. The storm had tried to claim her. The forest had nearly swallowed her whole, but the bear had kept her warm. She would later say the forest gave her back, but it hadn't been the forest, it had been her. Emily awoke to the scent of earth and fur, her cheek pressed against stone still warm from the massive body curled beside her. At first, she didn't remember where she was. There was only darkness, broken by the faintest glow from the cave mouth and the rhythmic sound of deep, slow breathing. Her mind, sluggish from cold and exhaustion, struggled to put the pieces together. Then, like shards of ice settling into place, memory returned, the blizzard, the collapse, the bear. She lifted her head and turned slowly. Ember lay inches from her, the broad expanse of her smoky brown coat rising and falling with every breath. The bear's eyes were half-lidded but open, watching. Not in threat, never in threat, in vigilance. Emily didn't move for a long time. Part of her was terrified that any wrong gesture might break the fragile thread of peace between them. But the cold had settled back into her bones, not the sharp agony of exposure, but the dull ache of a body pushed far past its limits. She needed warmth, food, and water. Mostly she needed to know this wasn't a dream, that she hadn't died somewhere in the snow and woken in the belly of something ancient and impossible. She sat up, her joints screaming in protest. Her clothes were stiff with frost. Her fingers burned with the sting of returning circulation. She rubbed them together, blew warm breath into her cupped hands, then looked at the bear again. "You saved me," she whispered hoarsely, her voice like broken glass. Ember blinked once, slow and unbothered, as if she understood. Outside, the storm had weakened, though the wind still howled around the stone. Snow fell in quieter flurries now, less like a blade and more like ash. Emily pulled herself to her feet and staggered to the cave entrance. The world beyond was still white, but no longer violent. The snow stretched unbroken in every direction, trees like skeletal fingers beneath the weight of ice. She needed to find help, food, but she was no fool. She would die if she tried to trek out alone again. Her body couldn't handle it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She stepped carefully from the cave, just enough to move behind a snowbank to relieve herself, then turned to head back and froze. A sound. Not the wind, not the creaking trees. It was a cry, high-pitched, weak, animal. Her heart jumped. She scanned the tree line, the ridge just beyond the clearing, and then she saw it. A small shape, low to the snow, thrashing in place. It was a cub, a bear cub, alone, crying, and trapped. Her breath caught in her throat. Her first instinct was fear. Where there's a cub, there's a mother, and where there's a mother, danger follows. But this cub was hurt. Its back leg twisted in a rusted metal trap, half buried beneath fresh snow. The sight of it ignited something in her, a flame buried deep beneath the frost of exhaustion. She couldn't leave it. She couldn't not try. Driven by something beyond reason, Emily trudged toward the cub, her feet dragging through thick drifts. The cub saw her coming and screamed, a sound so sharp it sliced through the air. It thrashed harder, eyes wide and terrified. "Shh," Emily whispered, crouching low, her voice cracked on the cold. "It's okay, I won't hurt you." The trap was an old-style jaw trap, illegal in many states, but still used by those unwilling to change. Its teeth were rusted but deadly. Blood stained the snow beneath the cub's haunches. Emily's hands shook as she examined it, careful not to get too close to the cub's teeth. She found a strong branch nearby and wedged it into the release mechanism. Her fingers slipped once, twice. She growled in frustration, teeth chattering. The cub whimpered again. Finally, with a sharp click, the trap sprang open. The cub kicked free, scrambling backward with a limp. It didn't run far, just collapsed in a pile of snow a few feet away, panting hard. Emily stood and backed away slowly, giving it space. She turned to head back toward the cave, heart hammering in her chest. She didn't know what had driven her to help it. She only knew it had felt right. The cub didn't follow, but it didn't run either. She wasn't sure what that meant. Back in the cave, Ember had risen. She stood near the entrance, nose in the air. When Emily reappeared, the bear turned her head, nostrils flaring. Emily froze. The air between them shifted. The scent of the cub was all over her, on her clothes, her hands, in the blood dried across her fingers. Ember stepped forward, slowly. Emily didn't move. She held her breath. The bear sniffed her jacket, the air just in front of her. Her eyes were dark, intelligent, and calm. Then she turned, walked past Emily out of the cave, toward the trees. A minute later there was a sound, small paws crunching snow. The cub. It limped from the ridge, mewling softly. Ember met it halfway, lowering her head. The cub nestled against her, trembling. She licked it once, twice, then turned her head. Her eyes found Emily's again. That same silent look. Not gratitude, not affection, but acknowledgement, understanding. And just like that, Ember guided the cub back into the cave. When Emily followed, both bears were curled against the far wall. There was enough room for her too. She hesitated, then lay down near them, close but not crowding. That night she slept beside two wild bears, and for the first time in days she slept without fear. She dreamt of fire, not the destructive kind, but warmth, like the heat that radiated from Ember's body, the glow that pulsed beneath her fur, the spark of something ancient and enduring. She dreamt of trees that stretched to the sky and snow that fell like feathers instead of knives. When she awoke, the cub was pressed against her side. Ember stood at the mouth of the cave, watching the sunrise push pale light across the forest. Emily sat up slowly. Her body still ached, but there was strength returning. Her mind felt clearer. She rose to stand beside Ember, watching the sky shift from a bruised gray to soft gold. She knew the storm had passed, but something else had taken root here, something she didn't yet understand. A bond, a moment beyond explanation, a miracle made of fur and frost and fire. She didn't know what the world would say about this, about a wild bear who had saved her life, about a girl who had saved the bear's child. But as the light grew stronger and the trees stopped whispering, she realized it didn't matter. The truth was here, in this cave, in these eyes, in this strange shared heartbeat between human and wild. And whatever came next, she would carry it with her always. When they found her, the world had long since stopped believing they would. It was the morning of the third day, and the storm had broken open like a wound, leaving behind a sky so pale and raw it looked peeled clean of color. Search teams had combed the outer reaches of the forest all night, their flashlights thin swords in the white dark, calling her name into a wilderness too vast to answer. But then came the footprints, boot prints, small and staggered, beside something larger. A paw print, massive, impossible. They followed the trail until it vanished into a ridge of stone, where a thin plume of smoke curled from the rocks like breath held too long. The first to approach the cave was a firefighter named Jonas. He called out once, voice low, and got no reply. He stepped carefully inside. What he saw made him stop cold. A girl lay curled near a fire pit made of scavenged stone, her clothes crusted with ice, her skin raw with cold. She didn't move. For a breathless moment, he thought they were too late, but then he saw her chest rise. And then he saw the bear. It was lying not 6 feet from her, coiled protectively with its cub tucked close, its eyes watching Jonas like twin embers in the dark. He didn't speak. He didn't even reach for his radio. He just stood there, heart thundering. The bear didn't growl, didn't move, only watched. Behind him, the others were coming, crunch of boots, low murmurs. Jonas raised one hand. "She's alive," he said quietly, "but we've got company." Moments later, they were pulling her from the cough, wrapping her in blankets, pressing warm water to her lips. Her skin was a pale map of survival. Chapped lips, frostbitten fingers, bruises on her knees from falling. She blinked up at them with glazed eyes. "The bear," she croaked. "Don't hurt the bear." They tried to calm her, told her everything was okay, she was safe now. But she wouldn't stop saying it. "She saved me." And finally someone listened. A wildlife officer named Clark was called in, his rifle slung over his back, eyes sharp with years of caution. He stepped into the cave alone, expecting violence. What he found instead was a bear who did not run and did not roar. She stood beside her cub, as tall as a man, and met his gaze with one that was ancient and steady. She made a sound, a low chuff through her nose, then backed deeper into the shadows, shielding her young. Clark backed out slowly. This wasn't chance, he said, and this was something else. By the time Emily reached the hospital, the media storm had begun. Reporters circled the building like crows. Headlines read, "Miracle in Montana, teen found alive after 3-day blizzard." But the truth beneath the miracle was more than survival. It was the story she told from her hospital bed. Voice still hoarse, eyes steady with something no one could quite name. "She didn't just keep me warm," Emily said. "She watched over me. She stood in the cave entrance when wolves came. She guarded me like I was one of her own." There was skepticism at first. Wild animals don't do that. Not bears. Not with humans. But then came the evidence. The cave, the claw marks on the stone where Ember had stood her ground. The blood near the trap where Emily had freed the cub. Her story held. The prints held. Even the fire pit, the way she had stacked the stones with hands nearly frozen to the bone, held. And slowly doubt turned to awe. Within a week, wildlife biologists were calling it unprecedented. Experts weighed in on the psychology of bears, on maternal instinct, on animal empathy. Some dismissed it as anomaly. But others, like Emily's own mother, a well-respected ecologist, believed it was something more. "We don't know everything we think we know about wild animals," she told reporters. "What my daughter experienced may be rare, but it's not impossible. It speaks to the parts of nature we've forgotten how to see." The story became national news. Emily's photograph, eyes tired but smiling from her hospital bed, was splashed across newspapers and television screens. People wanted interviews, book deals, television rights. She turned most of them down. "I don't want to be famous for not dying," she told her mother one night, the eye still dripping into her arm. "I want people to know why I lived." So instead, she began to speak, not on talk shows, but in classrooms, at wildlife conferences, through quiet essays that people read late at night and didn't forget. She spoke about Ember, not as a symbol, but as a creature of breath and bone and choice. "She could have left me," Emily said, "but she didn't. She stayed. Maybe because I helped her cub. Maybe because she saw something in me. Or maybe because the world isn't as divided as we think it is." With her mother's help, Emily launched a campaign to ban steel jaw traps in Montana's wilderness corridors. They petitioned Congress. They showed photographs. They built a case not just from her survival, but from what it revealed, that coexistence was possible. That fear didn't have to be the default. Donations poured in. Scientists offered data. Children sent drawings of Ember and her cub, and slowly minds began to change. Meanwhile, Emily healed. Her hands regained feeling, her body filled out again. But something inside her had shifted. She didn't want to return to college right away. She wanted to return to Moss Ridge, to walk the edge of the forest where her footprints had once vanished, to thank the land that had nearly taken her but ultimately given her back. Her mother hesitated, but agreed. They went together along with a team of researchers and cameras. They found the cave. The fire pit had collapsed, snow filling the space where her body had once curled beside a bear. The claw marks were still there. So were the tracks, new ones, faint but real. The researchers set up motion cameras and left quietly. No one expected to see her again, but they did. Weeks later, the camera caught her, Ember, larger now, still shadow dark with eyes that glowed amber in the night. And beside her, a new cub, small and wobbly, trailing after her like a leaf caught in a breeze. Emily watched the footage from her living room, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. "She's okay," she whispered. "She's still okay." The photograph of that moment, a young bear cub at the feet of its mother, both paused at the edge of the tree line, both looking toward the camera with eyes unafraid, would become the emblem of a movement. It hung in classrooms, in government buildings. It appeared on the cover of National Geographic beneath a single headline, "The Bond That Saved Them Both." But for Emily Parker, it was never about headlines. It was about a cave and a storm, and a heartbeat she thought would stop, but didn't. It was about the warmth of fur against frozen skin. It was about a cub and a choice, and a bear who had no reason to protect her, but did. And it was about what she chose to do with the life she'd been given back. Not just to tell the story, but to live by it, to defend what had defended her, to protect the wild the way the wild had protected her. The footage played in silence, broken only by the soft hum of the laptop and the shallow sound of Emily's breath as it caught in her throat. The camera had been motion-triggered, set on a tree trunk just outside the cave's entrance, what had once been her sanctuary. Now, in the grainy morning light, the bear emerged again, slow and powerful, fur matted with melting snow and thick from winter's final grip. But this time, she wasn't alone. A new cub, smaller than the one Emily had saved, trotted beside her on uncertain legs, pausing to sniff the air, to stumble through a patch of icy moss, then scramble back to its mother's side. The resemblance was undeniable. The shape, the way she moved, the way her head tilted at a sound in the trees. It was Ember, alive, still walking the forest that had nearly claimed Emily's life and offered her back in return. But it wasn't just Ember that brought tears to Emily's eyes. It was the stillness in that moment, the simple, breathtaking truth of it, that this wasn't an ending. It was a continuation, a passing on, a second chance. She watched as Ember turned her massive head toward the camera, eyes reflecting the rising sun. She stared directly into the lens for a long breath, then turned and vanished into the trees once more, her cub trailing like a shadow behind her. The screen froze on the final frame. Emily leaned forward, fingers brushing the image as if she could feel the warmth through glass. "She came back," she whispered, her voice shaking. She remembered. The footage swept through the conservation world like wildfire. Scientists debated its implications. Could a wild bear return intentionally to a known human site? Did Ember understand the camera's presence, or was it all coincidence? But Emily didn't need theories. She knew. She remembered the look Ember had given her before leaving the cave. The quiet weight of that last night they'd shared under the shelter of stone and breath and silence. It wasn't a bond that needed explaining. It was something deeper, ancient, wordless, real. With renewed momentum, Emily pushed harder for the federal sanctuary. Her mother, Natalie, worked tirelessly alongside her, bringing in legal advocates, researchers, even sympathetic ranchers who had once set traps near the forest's edge, but now saw it through different eyes. They called the proposal Ember's Refuge. It wasn't just a sanctuary for bears. It was a place for possibility, for rebuilding the fragile trust between wilderness and civilization. The land would remain wild but protected, untouched, except by those who walked it with reverence. The support was staggering. Donations from private citizens, letters from children, endorsements from scientists and indigenous leaders alike who had long understood the sacred bonds between human and animal, land and spirit. The vote passed. A year later to the day, Emily returned to Moss Ridge again. The blizzard had not come this time. The sky was clean, dusted with pale gold and streaks of late winter sun. Snow still clung to the edges of rocks, but the forest breathed easier now, its silence gentler. The camera crews had been left behind. This wasn't a press trip. This was hers. She wore the same boots she'd worn the day she got lost, though now the soles were repaired and the leather scuffed from other journeys. A small team of biologists walked with her at first, but when they reached the ridgeline that overlooked the cave, she asked them to stop. "I need to do this part alone," she said. They nodded, no questions asked. She stepped into the forest, the sound of her boots muted by old snow and pine needles, the same way she had all that time ago, except this time she wasn't searching for a signal. She was searching for a memory, for a whisper, for something she hadn't dared hope to find again. The path to the cave was still there, faint beneath the trees, though softened by time and wind. She paused when it came into view. The cave looked smaller now, as places often do when returned to. Less like a sanctuary, more like a memory made solid. She stepped inside. The air was cool and smelled of wet stone and something faintly familiar. Fur, perhaps, or the ghost of a fire. She knelt where she had once laid, brushing her fingers over the earth, now undisturbed by a paw or boot. She closed her eyes, listened. Wind rustled in the trees outside, a bird called somewhere far off. But here, in this stillness, she felt it. That echo, that presence, that weight of something watching, not with threat, but with knowing. And when she opened her eyes again, she saw her. Ember stood at the tree line just beyond the mouth of the cave, half hidden by shadows and sunlight. She had grown larger somehow, or perhaps it was just the weight of the moment that made her seem immense. Her fur was darker than before, her eyes unchanged. And beside her stood the cub, no longer wobbly, but tall and strong, peering at Emily with wide, curious eyes. They didn't move, neither did she. The forest held its breath. Emily stood slowly, not daring to speak. She took one small step forward. Ember blinked. Then she made that same low, chuffing sound, a breath expelled through her nose. The same sound Emily had heard that last night before the rescuers came. She didn't need translation. She knew it was goodbye. Or maybe thank you. Or perhaps simply, I remember. The bear turned, the cub followed, and together they vanished into the trees. Emily didn't cry. She didn't speak. She simply stood there, the sun pouring across her shoulders, and felt the weight of it settle into her bones like warmth. She walked back slowly to the ridge, where the scientists waited in respectful silence. No one asked what she saw. They didn't need to. She sat on a flat rock overlooking the valley and wrote in her journal, finger steady. She returned not because she had to, she wrote, but because something in her knew I would be here. She gave me more than survival. She gave me purpose. She reminded me that the lines we draw between us and the world are just that, lines. And maybe in the quiet places, they can fade. Months passed, then a year. Ember was spotted again, by trail cams, by researchers who left gifts of berries and never approached. She was never tagged, never tracked. She remained free. But always, always, she returned once a year to the edge of the forest, just close enough for the camera to catch her. Emily never spoke during those visits. She only watched, hand on her heart, and nodded. She had gone into the forest a girl hoping for signal. She came out a voice. Ember didn't just save a life, she shaped it. And in return, Emily helped shape something lasting. A sanctuary born from snow and silence, in a moment of shared breath between girl and bear. Moss Ridge Forest remained wild, but it was no longer feared. It was revered. And somewhere deep within it, when the wind blows just right and the snow begins to fall again, you might hear the echo of paws' steps beside boot prints, and know that once, against all odds, a storm became a beginning instead of an end.